It was great. Tonight I'd like to talk about a very good problem to have, or as Hamid called it, a stupid 200-year-old problem, and that's the U.S. Constitution. And not the USS Constitution, which is the oldest commissioned warship in the United States, or in the world, actually, in the world, but the document, the Constitution. Although if you think about it, the USS Constitution is a pretty good metaphor for the Constitution itself. You know, it's made out of wood, it's a finely made wooden ship, and whether it sinks or swims is kind of dependent on who's behind the wheel up on the bridge. Either way, it takes vigilance and effort to keep the Constitution afloat. And I know that there's some non-U.S. citizens among us, and I'm sure that you're very excited to hear about American problems with the Constitution, but what's remarkable about the Constitution is that it supports all men and women of all colors, not just its own citizens. It's like a mission statement for human rights in the entire world. And so that has a special relevance these days with Obama signing the NDAA, our National Defense Authorization Act, which defines the entire world as a global battlefield. So that's a good point to note. All men, all women, all colors protected. Pretty good. So now that we as Americans are going to recognize all men and women of all colors and the world as being equal, what is the problem with the Constitution? And the Constitution's main problem is that people think it's stupid and 200 years old and has no relevance on today's life. But I would say that it does have very good relevance, and it's not really that old. It's also very unique. The entire constitutional history was the only experiment in human history in which a whole nation of people lived in complete personal freedom. And that period of time took America from candlelight and horseback, sparked an industrial revolution, and changed the whole world. And that was because people were able to pursue their own interests and liberty. It was really quite remarkable. And that lasted until about 1913, which was probably the true dawn of globalization. That's when the world wars started, and the government assumed ownership via the personal income tax and Federal Reserve central banking system. They assumed ownership over the lives and labor and productive capacity of the people. And the reason why that's significant is because they now have a foothold to scientifically manipulate markets and therefore people and everything. I challenge you to think of, by the time I'm done talking, one thing in the world that is not somehow regulated by the government. It's really tough to do because they're in charge of the air, they're in charge of the food that you eat, the water that you drink, the pillow that you put your head on at night, everything. So try to think of one thing, you know. If you got rid of all those bureaucracies and all those regulations and all the physical resources that it takes to enforce all that intervention, and instead you just let the people keep all that and do whatever they wanted to do, think about how productive, the explosion of productivity that humankind would see. And that was what happened between the Constitution's birth 225 years ago today in 1913. You saw an explosion of productivity. And it brings people together too. Because as Hamid pointed out, it was slaveholders who wrote this document. You know, they said all men are created equal. And we all know that's a little bit of bull because they had slaves. But they weren't perfect. They couldn't see 250 years in the future. And it took all this time to get all this way. But the Constitution is valuable and it is relevant today because it enshrines liberty as the destination of man. Liberty is where you own your own body, your own mind, and the responsibility for that ownership. And as an ultimate destination, we can keep working that way. If we choose to turn away from the ideas of liberty, we go into slavery. And maybe it's debt slavery, like a lot of people work jobs they hate for today, or maybe it's literal slavery with chains. Either way, if you give people your liberty, they're not going to be kind to you in return. You have to be an active participant like those dedicated crews aboard the great USS Constitution, all 215 years of her glorious history, 225 years of American constitutional history can continue only with the participation and dedication of all people to the ideas of liberty. So, we'll talk about some more solutions next time, but tonight it's simple. Read the Constitution, understand the concepts of liberty, and let freedom ring. Thank you.
Thank you.